You're listening to Errol Parker and Clancy Overall, editors of the Betoota Advocate, on Desert Rock FM.
Welcome back to the Betoota Advocate's weekly podcast, our weekly radio show. Very excited to have today's guest on here. You're joined by myself, Clancy Overall, and of course Errol Parker, editor-at-large. And today's guest is a Queenslander, which is a relief.
First Queenslander for a while. It's been nice.
Yeah, we had Jason Fu, the Archibald Prize artist, last week, and before that we had Jenny Robinson of Assange's lawyer fame, all New South Welsh men and women who just don't get it, you know. They've lived, amazing, storied lives, interesting careers, but they just don't get it. And today's guest does. We kind of already feel like we're on another level here. A lot of, I guess you'd say, the sensibilities are restored in the booth today. You know, our northern, I guess, common sense, because it's not common in New South Wales or anywhere else for that matter. They've just announced a new AFL team for Tasmania, which is hilarious. And we can talk about all that as we go. Today's guest is from the deep north originally. Tom Walker, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me on. I'm a long-term admirer and reader of the Betoota Advocate, and I have friends who email me headlines.
Oh, well, it's good to know that I guess you're familiar with us before we start this podcast, because we're familiar with you. I guess you could say you played somewhat of a soundtrack in a lot of our lives in the newsroom out behind us, and you've actually lived an interesting life. You've travelled down the coast effectively decade by decade, would you say? You started off in North Queensland?
I was born in North Queensland, in Ayr, which is up north, and North Queenslanders do make that distinction. But my memories, that was a long time ago. I left there when I was 4 years old, and I was on a farm up there, on a sugarcane farm, of course, and then we moved down to another farm outside Grafton, and that's where I grew up.
So was that a cane-related move, or what was happening in Grafton there at that time?
No, I think it was a family-related move in that the cane farm on the Burdekin, which my mum and dad had cleared, that was all a going concern and got a good price and everything, but the rest of the family were northern New South Welshmen.
Okay.
So it's really just my brother and I, and we have a cousin who are Queenslanders.
Okay, all right, just time and place.
Yeah, well, the Clarence is a very impressive river. I mean, it's probably one of the premier rivers that they have down there in New South Wales. It's big, it's wide, it's powerful.
It is. There's a lot of water. I think it's the biggest by volume.
Mighty, is it, when you get to that size of river?
Clarence, yes.
They start getting mighty at that size.
I can actually tell you the lyrics of the Grafton High School song, if you like.
I'd like to hear that.
By the lordly... No, I won't go on.
Well, it's so big it's lordly, the Clarence
Where the
River.
lordly River Clarence flows in splendour towards the sea.
There we
That's
go.
how it begins.
That is, that is quite poetic for a school song.
Where the stately jacaranda blooms in regal majesty.
Well, they got the Jacaranda Festival each year still.
Yeah.
There our school, the pride and glory of a smiling, verdant land.
This is good stuff.
It's got a fair bit of purple prose in it, don't you?
This is the fractured syntax, grammar. In the hearts of all Graftonians, foremost shall forever stand.
Old
It is. You
Graftonians.
just have to step back in awe.
Yeah.
From a stanza like that.
Yeah. That's like I've been to Maclean. Is it Maclean, the town on the other side of the Clarence there?
Yeah, that's where the bridge is.
Yeah.
Downriver,
And it's very
Pacific
Celtic
Highway.
town. Were you feeling that
The Scottish town.
the Scottish, were you feeling that in the town as a young kid? Was it
Well, like,
Celtic?
especially coming from Ayr. I mean, have you ever been to Ayr in Scotland?
No.
It's like Lithgow by the Bay, it is. It's
Right.
very nice.
But were you feeling that in Grafton? That's got to be written by like overly romantic Scottish immigrants, that song.
Well, Maclean's the Scottish town.
Right.
Grafton's full of German, Italian, all sorts of surnames from everywhere. But Maclean's the Scottish town.
Yeah, right. I'm guessing South Grafton, you were a Rebels family?
I was in...
Or the Ghosts?
No, in my heart I was a rebel because South was where my mother grew up.
Right.
And my father is a Lower River guy.
Yeah.
But we actually lived on the north side of the river with the Grafton Ghosts.
Yeah.
But the Rebels, South being much more of a mongrel side of the river,
Yeah.
the Rebels from memory, won a lot more.
Yeah. It's unfortunate their hats, the Rebels' hats, have kind of been outdated now because of the Trump MAGA hats, because they were red with the white writing, the South Grafton Rebels. So from about 10 metres away, you look like a diehard Trump supporter walking around with that hat on, which I guess has affected the merchandise
He
sales.
ruined a lot of good hats of mine. I mean, some of my best hats were red. But you can't wear them anymore.
We've got a lot of, how would you say, a lot of talent came out of that region in an array of different fields. I'd look at one of the
Stumpy
guests.
Stevens.
Yeah, Troy Casadale.
Troy Casadale, yes.
Bridie Jabor is an author. She's been on the podcast here before. And, of course, you've got the Mundanes a bit further down the river. I'm not sure what the name of their town off the top of my head, but they are Bunjalong. Actually, where the asbestos mine.
Mundanes came up from Bar Ugle.
Yeah, where the asbestos mine was.
That's right.
Yeah, and they all escaped, in the boxing tents kind of brought the family to Redfern, I believe. But yeah, there's a lot more people from that region than you'd expect, because especially nowadays when people talk about North New South Wales, they think Byron Bay. Byron Bay would have been a ripple in the ocean compared to Grafton in that era in terms of size and in and out.
Byron was a whaling town.
Yeah,
and
heard that.
And and they had a jetty there until a cyclone flattened it. And my mother grew up there, and it certainly wasn't a resort town like it is now.
I mean, the big scrub. Do you remember any of that? Do you remember seeing the landscape change over the years?
The big scrub was more up in the Richmond, and I never saw much of it, but my mother grew up on the edge of it. So when it comes to, horticulture and botany and naming native plants and all that, she knows all that stuff and with encyclopedic knowledge.
Yeah. Oh, another name, sorry. The Masters family, Chris Masters and Roy.
Oh, yes.
Good Grafton stock.
Yes, their mum, Olga, my mother knew her.
Yeah. Yeah, no, they certainly brought down a few governments between the two of them.
And a few football teams.
Yeah, a few premierships. But when did you get the calling for Chris Masters? He said it was time. It was when he wanted to be a journalist. He had to start in the dirt. He had to go further west and start working in in the country newspapers. What was it for you? Was it university? Was it a?
It was university, and there's no university in Grafton. So the nearest university up north is University of New England and Armidale. And so that's where I went. I can't remember applying too much to come to Sydney. It was just the natural place for anybody who's going to university up there just goes over to Armidale.
Yeah. And how was that experience? Armidale is quite a regal, well, not regal.
It's not quite at sea level.
No.
Compared to Grafton. So while it's not too far as the crow flies, it's certainly a different kettle of fish altogether, isn't it?
Oh, from any other regional town, certainly at the time, because it was the only regional town with a university.
Yeah.
And also, not only the university, it had had a teachers' college for 50 years and a whole handful of private schools.
Yeah.
So it's an educational town, so it's a little bit different.
It's a pretty town to look at. It's
beautiful.
And the cathedrals and the churches and that kind of. But what was it? Was that environment young people? Was that what you were feeling around there? Was it you were surrounded by all of these mines that were being moulded? I'm guessing by a bit of Riverina Rowley and some interesting things on the radio.
Yes, the Rowley didn't have to come from as far away as the Riverina. But
no, probably just across at Ebor.
Yes, that's right. But yes, there's a lot of young people there because of all the educational institutions, and so there's a lot of the rituals have to do with people between 18 and 25 trying to make fun for themselves in a small town.
And do you feel like this is, when you look at some of the bands you've played in over the years, there was very much a pub or a kind of suburban grit to them, I felt, just from me as someone who's listened to them my whole life.
Thank you.
It's kind of different to what you expect. There's more BNS balls and I guess race days happening in Armidale. When did you start feeling the Australia that you feel in your songs? I mean, I'm sure they vary and there is a bit of a country element as well, and sometimes. But you made quite universal music that actually wasn't country music. It was very much, it translated right across the country. Was that when you moved to Sydney you started feeling, a metropolitan, or at least a kind of a wider net?
I moved to Adelaide first.
Right.
And spent a few years there.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first big town that I lived in. And when I was in Armidale, I wasn't writing. So you're right, the music up there for entertainment is, especially out of the university, balls and cabarets.
Yeah.
And the kind of bands that are playing out there are playing cover songs to people who are pretty flattened.
Mm-hmm.
Well-dressed but flattened.
Yeah.
So there's not much that comes out of that in what I do.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until I got to Adelaide, and especially when I hooked up with the other young guys in Cold Chisel, and we decided we'd shoot for, trying to do some original songs, that I started to try and figure out how that might go.
There's so many influences from that era of music, I would say, that you can hear in that era of music. The pub rock era, there was a lot of the 10-pound pom, there was a lot of...
Yeah, it's very like Australian Gothic.
Well, Adelaide, and especially if you go up the Gulf to Whyalla and places like that, and Elizabeth, where Jim came from and Jim Barnes came from, and our drummer Steve Preswich, it was full of skilled North of England and Scottish immigrants. Guys who had like a welding ticket or electrical or something like that. Guys who could build stuff and weld stuff and put stuff together. They shipped them out, whole suburbs full of them. So there's a strong North of England and Scottish soul input into the bands that were forming in Adelaide at that time.
And what do you think came first? Was it the Adelaide music scene, or was it these kind of families, bringing their kind of sound to Adelaide? And we've spoken to Ian Moss as well. He heard about something happening in Adelaide and he moved there from Alice Springs. Did the same thing happen to you?
Well, no, I moved down there because I had a job.
Yep.
And I thought he moved down there because he had an apprenticeship, and there wasn't very far to go in Alice Springs.
No, it's only a bus ride, which I can imagine in the 70s would have been pretty quick, and
between Alice Springs
and comfortable with air conditioning and all the mod cons,
wooden seats,
antisocial behaviour.
Yeah, you went there for work and then fell into this crowd.
That's right. Yes, I came out of university with qualifications and a Commonwealth cadetship, which meant that the government owed me a job, but they didn't have many jobs to suit somebody who had my qualifications. So there was only two places I could go, and Adelaide was one of them.
And what were you looking at doing?
I was a physicist on the theory side and a mathematician, and the only places they could find me a job were at the Commonwealth Aircraft Factory at Fisherman's Bend in Victoria, or the Weapons Research Establishment in Salisbury, which is north of Adelaide. So I chose Salisbury, and they said, well, turn up in Adelaide and ring this guy and he'll take you out there. So
right.
There was no cover letter online. There was nothing.
No, none of that. So I found lodgings in a university college in North Adelaide and rang the guy, and he's a lifelong friend, and we got in his old bomb car and he took me out there and I started a job.
So you've joined a long list, not really a long list, an exclusive club of musicians who once, who've come from that field. I mean, the ones that spring to mind would be Art Garfunkel. I think he's got a degree in maths.
Does he?
Brian May from Queen. He's got a few degrees in astrophysics. I'm not sure if you were a part of the Space Wars division down there, but look, there's a lot of them. I think there's Dexter Holland from The Offspring. I think he's also a PhD candidate in maths.
Okay.
Has having that kind of foundation academically really helped you in your songwriting endeavours?
No.
Well, there you go.
With music, reading music, is there something there with maths and reading notes?
No, I haven't read notes since.
Yes.
I mean, I can sit down and laboriously do it, but I haven't read notes really since I was a teenager.
So can you do things like your tax return in your head or something, or like have you just completely just turned off that part of your mind, really?
No, as soon as you put a dollar sign in front of the numbers,
Rain
there's
Man.
It takes all the fun out of
those
maths.
old tape decks that have got a pause button?
Yeah.
I've got one of those in my brain when you put it.
As soon as you bastardise maths with a currency sign,
That's right.
it cheapens it.
And then, so tell me what happened. Was it a case of falling in with the wrong crowd, or was it a case of trying to find something to do in Adelaide that you ended up being part of a pivotal moment in Australian music history in terms of the Adelaide pub rock jump-off?
By that stage, I was over it with the maths and everything. The job I had out at Weapons Research was not a particularly exalted job. I was listed as an aeronautical engineer working on a reasonably obscure problem. And in the meantime, I was enthralled by music and trying to figure out how to write songs and going and seeing bands all night, every night, and I wanted to be in a band.
And then was it a case of a bunch of guys who aren't in a band form a band, or was it a case of an existing band that everyone kind of joined one by one until they took control of it?
It was like that. It was the second. There was apparently an existing band. There was a guy called Les Kaczmarek who was the bass player in that band, and he seems to have been the organiser of that band because he was in a position to fire people. Mm-hmm. So they had a keyboard player who, I'm told, was on a trip to Sydney to buy many thousands of dollars worth of gear, and while he was gone, Les advertised his job. Okay. And I answered the ad and went out to a suburban house and walked in, and Ian was there. And I had met Ian 6 months previously at a jam somewhere and run into him for a few times. So that was sort of the beginning of the band. So their existing keyboard player and guitar player, we never even met them.
Right.
And as soon as Ian and I joined, we got together with Les and we fired their drummer and got Steve in.
Right. And then from there it was pub gigs, or was it on the road?
Well, it was no gigs.
No.
It was just rehearsing.
There
was, after a little while, Ian wanted to concentrate on guitar, so we started looking around for a singer, and we got Jim, who was known in the band, and we had connections because they were from Elizabeth.
Yeah.
And so Jim came in, and we were just rehearsing. We had no connections to be able to get gigs except Les Kaczmarek, the bass player. He came from a Polish family, so our first gig was at the Polish club.
I've heard of a lot of gigs at the Polish clubs over the years. They kind of just let you go?
We did what we did at that stage to pretty much not much reaction at all. At the Polish club, I remember there was like a sparse smattering of old Polish people who probably just trying to get over the war.
Yeah. Mm. And you guys were just bringing some really gentle kind of music to them.
Yes, it's just what they needed.
And then when did you feel it happening? When did you feel it, now I have to look at my calendar? When did you have that feeling? I'm going to be at the Night Train in Broken Hill on that weekend. When did you feel the movement as a band happening? Was it a year in?
We moved. I went back to Armidale to do some more study, and they decided, well, can we come too?
Yeah.
And so they all threw their jobs in and got a cheap little van and moved to Armidale for 6 months, which was
The coldest 6 months of their life.
A pretty hedonistic 6 months for them. So there was a lot of moving around. And they did a lot of gigs and became a much better band in Armidale. I could sit here and tell you years of this stuff because we didn't actually get anywhere for a good many years.
Yeah. So there was a lot of just, how would you say, just
failure.
Running the ball up, getting tackled and doing it again.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, you know, there's a lot of that in niche Outback Queensland reporting as well. There's a lot of years spent being blown around the doldrums.
Yeah.
So I can
Yes.
imagine what it was like.
Yeah, hitting the ball up,
Yeah.
getting hit under the ribs and coughing it up. Just starting again.
I want to talk about the themes in the music that you wrote in that band, as a solo artist as well. When did you start feeling like you could talk about things? Was that like from the themes of a lot of your music in terms of like young manhood or, stoicism or war? When did you feel like you could do that and your lyrics were special enough to do that? Because that's a really interesting thing that everyone kind of takes from that era of music, was like, actually, this was the first time we heard about being us in Australian rock music.
Well, I don't know. There were people before that who were writing. I mean, Slim was writing Australian music like that for 20 years.
There's probably
before
60
we came
albums in
along.
at that point.
30 years. Yeah, something. Yeah, 60 albums in.
Well, I suppose that Joy was writing a lot of that. I mean, you know.
Yeah, and when you talk to those people, they talk about, oh no, we didn't start this. There was Tex Morton, and they have their own heroes of a previous generation. So I wouldn't say that I or we started anything. But, 5 years before we came along, there was Greg McCainch writing very serious local lyrics, and those lyrics were a lot of why people were getting into his band, Skyhawks. The trouble is, it was all about Victoria.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't need to add to that, do I?
No, not at all. We've got enough of that. They got their own horse race. Would you say some of your songwriting was anti-war, or would you say it was more of the experience? And where did that kind of click for you? We talk about veterans coming home, and a lot of the things that actually hadn't been discussed that publicly. Aside from Normie Rowe, we hadn't actually seen a lot of that stuff talking about the experience of people, particularly Vietnam, coming home to Australia.
I didn't feel like, that I was giving myself permission or anything, or that anybody needed permission to write exactly what they like. And I wasn't in a position when if you're talking about Khe-Sanh, when that song was written, I wasn't in a position that anybody would ever hear it.
Yeah.
At that stage, we were living in Sydney. We were doing a gig a fortnight somewhere up the coast. There was no chance that we would get a record deal because we'd been knocked back by every major company and a few of the minor ones. So I was really just writing for my own pleasure, or out of my own interests and making stories work and rhyme. And also, I guess what you're touching on is, why would anybody be writing about veterans, however inaccurately?
Well, that's not what I'm asking. I'm saying it was the first time anyone actually said, "This is the experience."
Well, my father was a veteran.
Yeah. And I was going to ask. You had a long line of family
Yes.
to your grandfather in the First
My
World War.
grandfather was a veteran. My grandfather came home from France with big pieces of one side of his face missing, and he went over there with his best mate from Maclean, and the best mate never came back.
Yep.
His two brothers never came back, and I could sit here and tell you stories about all that. Same with my father and his brothers and cousins, and so that's all. Come from a family where I'm the first generation where we're not, returned soldiers.
Yeah, not sent. And did you ever feel that being a part of the plan for you? Did you ever see yourself going that way? I mean, you did get pretty close down there in Adelaide on that first job you had after university, but was there a bit of military in you, or?
I wouldn't have done it. I was in the cadets at school, and I wouldn't have left school and joined the army.
No.
And I was shielded, by going to university, I was shielded a bit from the ballot, which was operating at that time, conscription. I graduated, towards the end of the conscription era.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing was always around, and joining the army was probably not something that I would have done.
And then when you start having songs like Kaysan, Cheap Wine, were these sleeper hits? Were these ones that you wrote and you performed and you performed and you performed, and then you found that they resonated so heavily that they kind of became popular and requested for that way? Or was there one moment or one song that kind of led to the radio play and then the increase in phone calls?
Cold Chisel was never much of a radio band until radio kind of had to get on board.
Yeah.
So going back to the songs, I think Kaysan was our first single, and it clocked in the high 50s. It got to number 47 or something, and then dropped out again. And from then on, you wouldn't hear it unless you came and saw us live. But more and more people were doing that. And so it was a long sleeper and a grower.
Yeah.
And two big changes happened. Somewhere around, after a few years, I was trying to write hit singles, radio singles, which never came naturally to me. I'm not that kind of writer, but nevertheless, I was thinking, how hard can it be? And at the same time, I had mates in Dragon, and in particular, Paul Hewson, who would just like get up and write a hit before breakfast. And so I could see the dramatic change that happens to your life when you have a hit single. Because when I first met those guys, they were eating toe-clipping sandwiches upstairs down at Coogee Bay Hotel. They had no money and nothing happening. And then they had like a string of, over 4 months, they had a couple of hit singles, and it went off like, their whole life went off like a rocket ship. And I thought, and I was still on the toe-clipping sandwiches and thinking, I would really like some of that.
Yeah.
So we were... I was really trying to do that. And so I wrote this song, Choir Girl, and that got some leverage at radio and started to get played on the radio. A completely different song to what we do live, we're doing live, which was getting more and more ferocious. But it was something that radio could play, and it had melody in it, and it wasn't too fast and stuff like that. That made a big change. The other big change that happened was that FM radio came in.
Yep.
Sometime around 79 or 80, and for some reason what we were doing and what our raft of bands were doing, by that I mean, us, the Oils, the Tats, and the Angels, and that kind of generation of bands really fitted with FM radio about the time that we're all taking off live.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was about to say, how do you think your songwriting has evolved over time? I mean, how you were saying that, Kaysan came from a time when you didn't really have, pressures to perform every night. You didn't have a label that was breathing down your neck, asking you to do another one. How did it change over time, sort of going from the early singles like Kaysan into something more contemporary like Choir Girl? Did the music come first, or was it just always the lyrics?
I've always been focused on the lyrics. I guess as I got older, I became drawn to people who, in my listening, to people who are good with lyrics. And I always recognised through listening to the music that my father loved from the 30s, which, great American songbook stuff, that there's some serious and beautiful lyrical skills going on beneath the melodies. So that was always probably more of a concern of mine than most contemporaries.
Yeah.
I would say, perhaps, maybe.
And how did you navigate I mean, you've had such a storied career outside of Cold Chisel, and you've had many iterations with your music in bands, and now, of course, with your fourth solo album. How did you navigate the lifestyle? That's what I want to ask. I mean, even from before you'd even had the pressure of the gigs and the stadiums and the whatevers, you had the blokes living in Armidale for 6 months while you're trying to finish uni. You know what I mean? And they're living hard. How did you kind of navigate all of that, or was it all one momentum? It was all moving towards the same place, which was to just keep playing as much as possible and keep writing as much as possible.
Well, we're always focused on the music and the writing and really, really obsessive about what we do and trying to get better and better and figure it out. And listening to a pretty broad river of music, of input. Yeah. For me, I was a Led Zeppelin fanatic and I was a Duke Ellington fanatic. So, but how do I, synthesise those two? And there's 6 other things that I love. Yeah. How do you mix Frank Zappa in there? Or Ella Fitzgerald. How do you mix Frank Zappa and Ella Fitzgerald? I'd love to see that on stage, but I'd love to see Frank sing, and Ella play the guitar.
Closest I've seen to that is Adele and Darius Rucker doing a duet. That was pretty special. That's about as obscure a duet gets, I think.
Yeah, they had one at the.
They covered Lady Annabella. It's a good track.
Yeah,
it's a good track. But how with the it's the only industry you've got where your employer effectively for the night drops in a couple cartons into the green room and expects you to finish them. There's no other workplace like that where you're expected to do that. How did you guys keep moving forward, or was it just you just take it in the ribs and wake up dusty and have a coffee and a cigarette and do it again?
Yes, as you just said, and it's just a matter of how deeply you want to dive in. Yeah. But there's no question that you are diving in. This is part of. Yeah. I mean, it's part of the attraction. Yeah. You don't have to get up in the morning and turn up somewhere for work at 8 o'clock or 8:30. You can sleep in. You can stay up as late as you like. Sleep in the next day. A lot of the time, there's not much food, but there's a lot of drugs and drink and
dinner at Arthur's at 2 a.m. up in the Cross.
Arthur's, no, Arthur's didn't feature with us, but that was more like the glitterati of the time. Went to Arthur's.
I was just trying to think of a King's Cross locality. You spent a lot of time there over the years. You can feel a lot of the Sydney kind of red light district as well. Did you spend a bit of time in those haunts, or where were you? Were you doing that Bondi Kiwi thing, just driving up and down South Head Road doing gigs? In
that era, you're talking late 70s. I was pretty much based in the Cross. Mm-hmm. The other guys were for a matter of days, and then sensibly moved out. found couches to surf on. Jim was out towards Bondi and Bondi Junction, and also over in Oxford Street. A few of the blokes were in a share house over there.
Well, he is Scottish, so going to Bondi Junction is probably the natural fit.
Is it?
He's not a Celtics fan, though.
No, well, they do call, like, over in Ireland, they call Coogee County Coogee.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. When they lose yet another young kid to the sunshine, he's gone to County Coogee. Yeah. That might have been a bit before that.
Forget. I think Jim's a Celtics guy. Yeah.
The lifestyle of, everyone remembers the hard living era of the hard rock, pub rock era. When did you feel yourself starting to taper? Was that a solo thing, or was that another band? Like, I feel nowadays that you could easily do the cup of tea, I mean, you'd have to almost if you want to keep this career going. Cup of tea in the green room. Yeah,
I mean, like, for years and years, the only person really in contemporary music that I have seen regularly consume a bottle of vodka over the whole of the set would be The Game. Yeah. That Clance, were lucky enough to see in Belfast a couple of years ago.
He's a rapper from America.
He drank a bottle of vodka over the course of his kind of set, and that's something that Jim was really sort of known for, but he obviously doesn't do that anymore. Like, Is there a time when, you as a group kind of get to the point where it's like, is anyone keen to just go and have a pub steak and a couple of glasses of water and then go back to sleep?
After the show, well, I still, if we're doing like a Cold Chisel reunion now, I'll still fairly commonly have a scotch or two with Jim because he's interested in whiskey and I'm interested in whiskey. After the show, still, it's been a while since I've seen, white lines and stuff like that, but not as long a while as you would think.
Yeah. The Olympics was a good time.
Well, yeah.
You tell us. We'll move on from this one because we've got an album that's out now, recorded in 2 days. Is that true?
Yes.
2022.
Yes.
Was this coming out of the pandemic? How do you do that?
We're swapping files while the pandemic's on.
Yep.
Between me, Michael Vidal, the bass player who's on the Mornington Peninsula, Garrett Costigan, who's in Mooney Ponds with all the underbelly people,
And Bill Shorten.
and Bill Shorten, the toxic little weasel. And we've got Hamish Stewart, the drummer. He's in Manly, and Roy Payne, as he was in Mayfield, or as he stresses, East Mayfield.
East Mayfield.
Mayfield Heights.
Yeah, that's right. And we're passing around files and trying to so they're familiar with some songs while COVID's going on, and then we got an opportunity to get into a room together and we woodshed those songs quite intensely for a few days, come up with some new ones. We actually wrote a song all together in that process. So we did a couple of sessions like that of just in a rehearsal room for 3 days, and then we got together and did some gigs. 1 gig in Sydney, 2 gigs in Victoria, just to tighten everything up so that by the time you go into the studio on the back of those gigs in Melbourne, everybody knows the songs, everybody knows what the flavour needs to be and where we're all going with it. So you can go in and largely play them live. That's how you do an album in 2 days.
I was just thinking about that. We've just recently had our first experiences with filming on screen. We're doing a documentary on Fine Cotton, the Fine Cotton Affair. I'm sure you loaded.
Oh, fantastic!
I'm sure you loaded up on that one back in back in '85.
Like you and the entire Queensland government, police force, everyone.
But there's that one moment where you're stuck on one line. It just comes out wrong. Do you find, and that's something for TV, and that's something you just got to get over, and it doesn't matter how much you've rehearsed it, but do you actually feel you don't get caught up like that recording an album if you've been playing it?
That's right. If you've been playing it live, one night live in front of an audience, a song grows and becomes more embedded and developed than it does, from 10 weeks rehearsal.
Yeah, right. That's it just becomes a part of your recall.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Like I'm not sure if you have read it, but at the moment I'm reading Inside Out by Nick Mason. He's the drummer from Pink Floyd.
All right.
And they were saying that they were essentially performing Dark Side of the Moon live in 1971, and the album came out in 1973. So they had so much time to workshop everything. Like I'd say too, it's also having a few years of experience under your belt, kind of doing this. Like this isn't the first album you've done, so you know what you're doing. Does it get any easier to get an album out, or do you always have to go through the same kind of process?
It's a big exercise because I don't have a huge business infrastructure. So I'm essentially doing it with a manager and with a publicist and with some very close mates who I've been playing with for 10 or 15 years on and off. And so it's more of a cottage industry. But there's a lot of joy in it. I mean, I can't think of anything that you could do for a living that would be this much fun. Yeah. Except, what you guys do is the Betoota Advocate sounds like, a bunch of guys
unicycles.
In a hut out the back of the Betoota racecourse, a few beers, coming up with funny lines, and thinking, well, let's put this in a newspaper.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you say it's a bit of a making an album for you is like being inside a peanut gallery on unicycles, juggling and drinking full strength 4X bitter. Because
I've often thought that it's just like that. Yes.
I want to talk about the songwriting. Is it the song, whether you're with Tex or whether you're with Ian or whether you're with the band you're working on your solo album, do you find yourself, especially with such emotive themes, that we've seen over the years, some songs are rock and roll, some songs, everyone's thinking about what they're hearing you sing. Do you defend your songwriting, or it's all about what works as a song? Have you ever had to defend, your songwriting? Kind of, guys, I think this will actually work. It's not really a jump on cars kind of rock song, but it is or do you feel like you're all in the same vein? You're all kind of in the different bands you've been in. You're all got the same vibe about the music you're making.
If you notch up a few wins, then people around you, I guess, trust your idea, what the ideas that you have, especially if you're not utterly dogmatic. Nobody wants to work with somebody nobody wants to be just a session player.
Yeah.
For an egomaniacal songwriter.
Yeah.
So
like being in the Beach Boys.
yeah. So you got to be. If you set things up like that, you're just not going to have a very good band.
Yeah.
So the first thing you have to do is get other people into writing, and so everybody's having fun.
Yeah.
But when I bring something in, I've got a reasonably clear I've got a pretty clear idea of how I think it should go. But I'm always open because other people can have good ideas too.
Well, we look forward to seeing some of these songs live. Errol, where can you see the fourth studio album of Don Walker, Lightning in a Clear Blue Sky?
So look, the first one, it really sends a chill down my spine because I've had many a cold beer here, and I've also spent a lot of nights seeing the sunrise in this part of the world. It's Friday the 19th of May at the Imperial in Yamundi.
Oh, Kevin Rudd Country.
Kevin Rudd Country there. And then the next night, May the 20th, we're at the Old Museum in Brisbane, which is a fine venue. And then there's a bit of a break over Queen Victoria's birthday. We go back to the Factory Theatre in Sydney, and that's on Friday the 16th of June. And then the next night, the Saturday the 17th, we're down at the Barrel Bowling Club in Barrel. I wonder who's going to pop in there.
Is that where, that'll be where Don Bradman learnt to bowl, the Barrel Bowling Club?
Don Bradman's from Cootamundra, but yeah, I think he did learn to bowl his right arm orthodox spin down there at the Barrel Bowling Club. But look, I think he was more of a batter than a bowler. And then on Friday, the 23rd of June, we're at the Suki Lounge in Melbourne. It's probably somewhere quite fashionable. Don, have you ever played at the Suki Lounge?
Have played at the Suki Lounge, yes.
No, I guess it's somewhere in the middle.
Belgrave, Victoria.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah, that's nice. And then on Saturday, the 24th of June, we're at the Memo Music Hall in St Kilda, which I guess is a satellite town of Melbourne these days, isn't it?
St Kilda?
St Kilda.
St Kilda.
Very, it's a little bit upmarket these days, but there is a stretch, as in King's Cross, there is a stretch that is just as colourful as it always was.
Keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, and you're also playing at the Blues on Broadbeach Festival. There
yes,
in
it's the 21st of May.
On the Goldie, yep, and then
yes.
at the Gympie Muster.
The Gympie Music
Yes.
Muster. What a sensational show that is. I've been to many musters, actually. Do they put you up in tents there, or what's the go?
No, we're in a motel. It's no, Gympie is, as you blokes would know, Gympie can be a pretty cold place around muster time.
Yeah.
You don't want to be out in the open air.
Yeah, no, it's the Gympie Muster. I dare say each time you go, 80% of the patronage have been there before. It's a real recurring crowd. They get hooked on it. It's
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a great weekend out if you haven't done it before.
Can help to have the rum blanket if you're camping out under the stars, though, that at that time of night. But Don, the album's out this Saturday, May the 5th.
Yes.
This podcast will go live on the Monday.
So the album's out a couple of days ago.
Yeah. You can get it at any streaming service.
Yep.
You can't get it at Sanity anymore because the last one shut the other day. So
Did it?
yeah.
Yeah.
So head to Don's website.
Chase tickets and the new album.
download sites or in stores on vinyl and CD.
Mm-hmm. It wasn't like in our day where you just go to Napster, you know.
Yeah, we really put an whole industry on its skates as teenagers. Didn't
Yeah.
Do a bit of sharing.
Poor old Metallica. How would they ever recover?
They were filthy. Anyway, thanks for joining us, Don. Great yarn. Obviously, a man who's inspired the Betoota Advocate greatly over the course of our existence. And thank you for running the ball up for all those years to bring us and treat us to what you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me on the Betoota Advocate podcast.